All right. We usually do this presentation on a Monday night, and I normally do a pre-show. This is before Lynn gets up here because she doesn't like the pre-show. For those of you who have come early, you get blessed. A lady gave me this thing in Alabama. It said, a cowboy's tombstone. Here are 5 rules for men to follow for a happy life that Russell Larson had inscribed on his headstone in Logan, Utah. He died not knowing that he would win the coolest headstone contest. 5 rules for men to follow for a happy life. 1, it's important to have a woman who helps at home, cooks from time to time, cleans up and has a job. 2, it's important to have a woman who can make you laugh. 3, it's important to have a woman who you can trust and doesn't lie to you. 4, it's important to have a woman who's good in bed and likes to be with you. 5, it's very, very important that these 4 women do not know each other. Or you could end up dead just like me. Now that's worse the night to come. That's part of the pre-show. I've still got a couple of minutes.
I know you do.
The man goes to the doctor's office and says, the nurse says, what do you got? He said, I got the shingles. He said, sit down and fill out this form. He filled out the form, and so she said, go take this form and go in this room. So doctor came up and said, what do you got? He said, I got the shingles. He said, well, okay, you take all your clothes off. He did. He said, where are they? He said, they're out there in a truck. I'm the man working on your house.
If you laugh at him, he can go on forever and ever.
Yakov, remember Yakov down at Branson? I actually won the best joke contest down there.
This is a true story, but tell them.
What do you mean this is a true story?
Well, it is.
Did I tell untrue stories?
No.
I don't do like other preachers that make up stories.
But tell them the rest of the event.
I don't believe I will.
I think you should. They know you. You need to tell them.
Okay, what happened is I told this joke, and I can tell it to you, but I don't have time to fool with it right now. If you come early tomorrow night, I'll tell you this joke that they had people stand up in the audience and tell a joke, and then the audience applauded on who had the best joke. Well, the audience awarded me with the best joke. So I came up on the stage. I mean, we had hundreds of people there, and they came up there. He said, where are you from? He said, I'm Clem Condiddlehopper from Cut and Shoot, Texas. Our town's so small, the hello, the goodbye signs on the same post.
The problem is he wouldn't hush.
Yeah, then a tornado came through and did $5,000 worth of good.
I mean, he kept going on, and Yakov kept trying to interrupt him to start the show.
The audience then thought I was part of the program.
They finally came out with 2 ushers to take him off the stage while he was still talking. And that's the truth. I have a video of it.
See, when you say I'm telling the truth, you indicate that sometimes I don't tell the truth.
Well, it's arguably.
I'm not like Scott. He makes up stories that I know never happened.
All right, it's time to start.
Okay.
Let's go.
Okay, as we work with people, families, singles, married, all kinds of people, we find 3 major problems. Communication, communication, communication. If you can communicate with people, then you can pretty well solve your problems. And what keeps us from good communication? Well, sometimes what you mean by a phrase is not what I mean by a phrase. A lady had a class of small children one day and said, let's share a happy thought. One little boy says, I'm going to Disney World. Grandma's coming, going to have a birthday. Little boy spoke up, what's your happy thought? He said, I believe I'm pregnant. Well, the teacher didn't know exactly what to do with that. So she said, oh, okay. So after his class, she pulled him off the side and said, well, why do you think that was such a happy thought? She said, oh, teacher, that's easy. This morning at breakfast, my mother told my daddy, I believe I'm pregnant. He said, that's a happy thought. You got to be sharp if you're going to stay with me, baby, okay? All right. Now, have you ever left church some Sunday and your husband says, honey, let's don't go home to eat. Let's go out to eat. And he says, where do you want to go? And you say, any place. And he picks Chinese food, the very place you didn't want to go. And on the way home, he sees you're not looking to, well, what's wrong? Don't want to go here. Yes, but you said any place. Well, I'm not here. Well, here again, this is where we do a 1 to 10. 10 being the best, 1 being the worst. If I want to indicate something, of course, you know, we eat out a lot, and we got the, well, what we do, I'll leave it at that. And
Because you like to eat.
I
know.
like to eat, that's right, yeah. I picked up that habit in early childhood.
Go
But
ahead.
anyway, okay, so I say, Lynn, where do you want to go eat? Well, what are you going to go, Waffle House?
Well, that's probably a 3.
Oh, what about McDonald's? It's right down the street.
Well, I'm not sure we're moving in the right direction.
Okay, well, what about McAllister's?
Oh, well, that's probably a 6.
Oh, well,
7.
at least it's better. Okay. Now, you can do this in a number of things in your relationships. Whether or not you're going to have your mother-in-law over for a meal this weekend might be something you want to do 1 to 10. Now, let's build then on what we're going to be working with tonight. I'm going to assume that everybody, if I get this on, Scott. Yeah. Okay, everybody have an outline? If you don't, raise your hand. We got it? Oh, got a hand over there.
Got one here, I think.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay, got another hand over there? Any other hand? Got another hand someplace?
Okay.
Those of you who raise your hand and agreed to give $5,000 to the building program. And on behalf of the elders, we thank you very much. All right, everybody got it. Okay, here we go. Going to need to fill this out because in about 7 or 8 weeks, you're going to have to, then we're going to have a test over the whole thing. All right, let's talk about a foundation for good communication. Number 1 would be the servant heart. And that's why we spent Sunday, because that's the foundation of everything that we're going to be doing this week. It comes back to whether or not we're going to have the mind of Christ. And if you got to hear the sermon Sunday, then you know that was the final slide that we did. Secondly is what we call the godly approach. The key to understanding this is when you're working with people, whoever it might be, you don't go in there, winning and losing is not really the priority. The priority is beginning to understand and feel with this individual. With adults, sometimes you need to seek to find a solution that's really works for both of you rather than the solution maybe that you came out with. When you work with children, here again, they might not agree with what you have had to say, but hopefully you were kind in what you had to say and what you did with them. Finally then, emotional intimacy. Emotional intimacy is the freedom from anxiety in the presence of vulnerability. Actually, this is another whole lesson that we're going to be able to do in these 8 weeks. This will work, freedom from anxiety in the presence of vulnerability. That's basically our definition. It's going to vary with situations and people because it's not all going to be the same. People need to feel that they're safe and they're not threatened at all. So that's very important. So that's basically the foundation then for good communication. Whoever's in charge of handing out outlines, we have people coming in that I believe are not getting outlines. You don't have any more? Well,
Oh, okay.
okay.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah,
We'll catch
okay.
them up.
That $100
That's okay.
bill on the secret seat really pulled him in. as far as I can tell.
No.
All right, let's then move on to the foundation. Let's talk about communication. What keeps us from effective communication?
Really, this particular session and the session that will follow next Wednesday night kind of dovetail together. That one will just build on this one. And so we call it a bad news, good news or dual session, simply because if you can endure the bad news, the barriers, we will end with the good news, the builders of communication. The number one barrier to good communication, and I don't care if you're talking husband, wife, parent, child, any relative, anyone you know, anyone you work with across the board, the number one barrier is that we see the world differently. The psychobabble term, perceptual differences, my definition, our own mental glasses. Some people call it a mental filter. Ladies and gentlemen, not one of us sees the world as it truly exists. We don't have that capacity. Now, that doesn't mean we have no baseline of reality. Oh, we do. But every one of us will spin the events that are going on around us including our own behavior, the behavior of other people, the behavior of everyone in the world, whatever we want to talk about, through our own mental glasses, a mental filter. The phrase that we really hope you will never forget, and if you will internalize it, it will save you lots of grief throughout your life, is not right, not wrong, just different.
Say it again.
Not right, not wrong, just different. Now, we're not talking moral and ethical issues here. We'll get into that in other sessions, because then there is a right and a wrong. But what we're talking about now is most of the things that we disagree about, I don't care the arena, where we are, would be personal preference. It's not right, it's not wrong, just different. Ladies and gentlemen, hardwired into us the very moment of conception is difference. And within that difference lies the potential for conflict, correct? Now, if you're like me, or you're like Jerry, or anyone we've ever interacted with, there's a little small voice inside of you, and sometimes it's not so small, and sometimes it's certainly not quiet or little, and it thinks and sometimes says, if you don't see the world exactly the way I see it, there's something wrong with you. All right, I want you to look around. Do you see anyone that looks like you? No, we know you. We don't have identical twins tonight.
No, we don't have any identical twins.
Once in a while we will, but not
We did
tonight.
one time.
Okay, all right. So we laugh because that's ludicrous, right? Now, that being the case, did anyone come into the auditorium tonight, the building, whatever, downstairs, and the first person that you saw, did you say to them with a little bit of distress or disgust, "What's wrong with you? You don't look like me"? Of course not. Then why is it we look at each other, regardless of where we're interacting, and so often we think and we say, "What is wrong with you? You don't see the world the way I do." Now, that being said, these perceptual differences, what would be some of the things that would determine this perception these few minutes after 7 o'clock on this Wednesday night?
Number one would be chronological age. At whatever age you are is going to have a lot to do with how you see the world. In other words, a 2-day-old child does not see the world the same way as a 2-year-old. 2-year-old does not see the same world the same way as a 12-year-old. You don't see the world the same way today as you saw yesterday. Why? Because you lived since yesterday. So at whatever age you are is going to have a lot to do with how you see the world. Number two in this thing would be life experiences. Life experiences. Every day you live, you experience something. You see something, you hear something, you read something. In other words, something basically happens to you. And we all haven't had basically the same experiences. And these experiences then factor in our mental glasses on how we see and how we understand the world. Let's go back to identical twins. Okay, the identical twins might like the same things in their hamburgers, might like the same sports, might like to wear the same kind of clothes, but they haven't had the same experiences. Huge in this area, and we mentioned it Sunday morning, would be family of origin. And I said it then, I'll say it again. You will be in your relationships today what you saw modeled in your family of origin unless you make a conscious effort to change. When we get a chance to do premarital counseling with young couples planning to get married, this is one of the things that we hit. This is one of the things we have. Because you see, the voices from the past, I'm not necessarily audible voices, but their experience from the past have a lot to do with how they're going to function and how they're going to see the world. For instance, Christmas. Do you open presents on Christmas Eve, Christmas morning, Christmas night? When do you do it? The toothpaste, do you squeeze it from the top, the middle, or the bottom? Toilet paper, does it roll over or under, and can anybody but a female change that? So here again, these are things that you would have to figure out. Money management. Do you live paycheck to paycheck? Do you put some money aside for emergencies? Well, what do you do? Parenting skills. In other words, you might not be on the same page. So family of origin has a lot to do with how these things work.
Number 3 in this area is personality. Now, personality is just a general term, and it really encompasses our thoughts and our behaviors that make us unique. You've probably heard of personality disorders. All that really is referencing is the fact that the behaviors and the thoughts that this particular individual is exhibiting are not congruent with what is considered normal in that culture. They might be fine in another culture, but in that particular culture, they don't fall within that norm. Now, the human personality is built in the shape of a pyramid, and the base of the pyramid is called what I call the accident of birth. Now, that doesn't mean the accident, you're here, you have something a talent you need to use, something you're to accomplish. No, that's not it. It's the accident of birth because it represents the genetics that are pre-wired into us the very moment of conception, as well as the early voices that rear us, the shoulds, the oughts, the have-tos, the musts. Now, why do I call it? And by the way, the series of blocks, if you're looking at this pyramid, you've got the base and you've got blocks down here. And this represents that old nature-nurture argument. Some of you probably remember that. How much is genetic? And I'm not talking hair, eye, skin color. And how much is learned behavior? How much is really from the environment that we are copying? And is it 70-30, 60-40, 20-80, 90-10? Who knows? Who cares? It doesn't matter. It just is what it is. And the thing about this pyramid is that we build on this thing from the ground up. We don't use a crane. But as we experience life in our years, we build on this, but everything that happens to us passes through these filters. Now, we can kind of change the shape and size and color of these blocks if we want. We're going to talk about that in another session. But initially, by the time a child is 5 or 7, that's pushing it. He or she has decided that the world is a safe place, and there are people here that will help me navigate it and find my way, or the polar opposite, it's every man for himself. I will survive only if I make an effort to survive, and of course, everything in between. Now, keep in mind, we're talking about genetics right now. We're going to talk about life experiences in Parenting 101. All right, but we're talking about these blocks that are genetic right now, that are inherited. And again, we're not talking hair, eye, skin color, that's a given. We're talking about personality. Genetic predisposition comes through the genes. Now, and by the way, at the moment of conception, you're in charge of absolutely nothing.
Absolutely nothing. It's the luck of the draw.
It is.
It's just where it is. You see, that's why sometimes you have a difficult time with relatives, because a lot of your relatives, you wouldn't choose as friends under normal conditions. And
No.
that's why some people then are upset with the idea that they have some friends that are closer than their relatives. Well, see here again, it's just a difference in genetics.
That's right. And it's not just the male and female. Remember, it's everyone in the genetic pools of the two. And that's why you can have children that are very similar or are very different.
Or you can have one that acts like old Uncle Henry, and nobody wanted a child to act like Uncle Henry.
Right.
But,
so, again, you love your relatives, but you might not like them.
No.
All right. Now, that being said, let's get into this a little more. In the 1970s, there was a very hot debate going on in religious circles, probably even legal circles, I don't know, but certainly in psychological circles and sociological circles, about whether or not alcohol was genetic or environmental. Now, so in other words, was it a genetic influence? Was there a gene that was influencing that, or was it totally a choice? Well, at that point, there was a very young psychiatrist, and I'm going to spell his name because we don't have time to really dwell, but those of you that like this kind of thing, go home and Google it. And you can just read all about him. His name is Robert Cloninger, C-L-O-N-I-N-G-E-R. Robert as it sounds, Cloninger, C-L-O-N-I-N-G-E-R. And by the way, I think he is still Professor Emeritus at WashU. That's where he has spent his career. But he was a very young psychiatrist at that point. That's the MD that works with the mind. And at that point, he joined hands with a very unique research pool out of Sweden. Now, let me tell you why this research pool was so unique. At the core of each subject, there was an infant that had been adopted out at birth. All right? But what made this special, that wasn't special, but the research, and it had been going on a long time, the research team had been able to maintain contact not only with the genetic parents, but with the environmental parents. And so for each subject, you had 5 people. All right? Well, he went in, and they were doing some other stuff. He went in, tweaked the design. You can Google it, read all about it. And you never say causality in science, but correlation. And when all was said and done, there was definitely a correlation between children that grew up to be alcoholics that came from teetotaling environments, yet one or both of their biological parents had been alcoholic. And then the reverse of that was true. Now, I'm not deterministic in any of these areas. We are not. But what I'm trying to establish is that we are all playing this game called life, and we're playing it with different cards. Okay? All right. But Cloninger is a psychiatrist. You know what he's wanting to do with this stuff. There had been some people that had kind of dabbled in how much of personality. What about how much is inherited? You know, is a baby just really something you make it? No, I'm going to say right now, most of us take way too much blame and way too much credit for the way our kids turn out.
Say that again.
Yeah, that's good. Most of us take way too much blame and way too much credit for the way our kids turn out. We do the best we can. We're going to talk about that in Parenting 101. But hopefully by the time we finish tonight, you're going to understand why that is a very, very true statement. Some people had dabbled in personality a little bit, but his research now is still the flagship research worldwide. It's been going on for decades now, as far as how much of personality is inherited. He went in, they tweaked the design again, and when all was said and done, again, you're not saying causality, he came up with 2 huge categories that had a high index of heritability. In other words, these tendencies came through the genes, and within those 2 huge categories, there were 7 subcategories. I think that's right, isn't that right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right. Okay, now, we're going to go through these pretty fast, but let me give you a word to the wise before we do. Okay, now, I'm very visual, and I hit Jerry when no, I don't either. But imagine that I have a yardstick. There's a continuum here, okay? And you're going to notice in your outline, we've tried to be really inclusive as far as this outline is concerned, so you can listen, you can write, but you'll notice there are adjectives that will be describing these 7 areas. Now, do not try to buttonhole anybody into the extremes on this. Most of us are somewhere up and down here. Okay? But I will say this. Anyone that is extreme in any of these 7 categories on either end will have problems with relationships.
Okay, that's important. Say that one again, Lindy.
Anyone that is extreme on either end of these 7 categories will have issues with relationships. I didn't say they weren't good people. I didn't say they weren't going to heaven. No one died and made me boss. That's not the point. The point is, scientifically, because of genetics, they will have issues with relationships. Now, keep in mind, these things are in place. You do not take a dog and make it a cow, right? You cannot take a child that leans this way, it's that old Southern word, and say, I don't like that, I'm gonna make him this. You can't do that. You might skill train him in some areas, you might tweak some areas, but you will not change any more than you're gonna change a hair, eye, skin color naturally, not what I've done artificially. Okay. Now, and by the way, as far as the adjectives are concerned, be careful because what you think the words might mean might not be Cloninger's definition. I'll alert you to that. And also, as you look at these adjectives, when I started saying this, I thought, well, if I could pick, I'd want this kid and not this kid. Don't do that because you don't know what else is working in that child's mind. You see, you have no clue. Okay, let's go. The first is domains of temperament. It affects the way we make our choices. The first one you see is harm avoidance, and you see the adjectives, anxious and outgoing, pessimistic, optimistic. Okay, and you may have a tendency like I did to say, well, I would definitely want the optimistic child. Wait a minute. Let's say you have 3 children. One of them has the genetic propensity for alcoholism, the other do not. As if you could choose which child that had the propensity for alcoholism in one of these 2 categories, what would you want? You would probably want the child that was more anxious and pessimistic, right? Because they're not going to dive in head first. The one that is optimistic is going to say, hey, this isn't going to affect me. I'm good. Let's go. So you see what I mean? When we hold that baby, we have no clue of what's inside there. It's just work and a lot of prayer.
They don't come with a tag on their toe saying, I am this way.
No, they don't.
Doesn't work that way. All right, novelty seeking, ready?
Yeah. Go ahead.
No.
You're making me work tonight. All right, the next one is novelty seeking. This one's impulsive, quick-tempered, rigid, slow-tempered. Some of you probably watched the Summer Olympics, Winter Olympics, and all the extreme sports stuff. Some of you are probably thinking, give me a chance. The others of you like me, nope, I'll just watch, thank you. It's not right or wrong. It's just different. Let's say you have 2 parents that are novelty seeking, high on that end, and 1 child that is rigid. Now, well, let's say you have 2 children. One is rigid and one is not. They're the other way. You take them snow skiing, all right? The child that is novelty seeking, probably 30 minutes in ski school and they want the black slopes. The child that is not, that is more rigid, they're going to stay on the bunny slopes the whole week long and just be so proud. And that's wonderful. But you see what happens if you have 2 parents that are novelty seeking, high on that end, and you have a rigid child genetically? That child won't be very old at all until that he gets or she gets the message verbally or emotionally some way that there's something wrong with me, because the parents can say things like, well, get out there and ride your bike. You're afraid of your shadow. Make friends. What's wrong with you? Ladies and gentlemen, there's nothing wrong with that child. It's everything that's wrong with the parents, because the parents assume because this is my flesh and blood, my DNA, this child should act this way. And ladies and gentlemen, scientifically, it's impossible to happen.
The third is what we call reward dependence. This is very important as you work with children or you work in a company. For instance, if you had a company and you wanted to get a president of that company, you would not want a person who was reward dependent. Why? He might be very intelligent, he might know the product real well, but he can't make the tough decisions that have to be made with the president or the CEO. And that's why a lot of companies fail today, not because they do not instill a very qualified individual, but the individual is reward dependent, and he can't go against the grain. He can't fire the people he needs to fire. He can't undo the people that needs to be undone. You can see this in children. We have 3 grandchildren living in Little Rock, One is 16, the other one is about a year and a half younger. Asher is the oldest. And Asher is not reward dependent at all. That's just the way he is. If you disagree with him, that's fine. He sort of shrugs his shoulders and goes on about his business. Now, his brother is about 18 months younger than he is. If you disagree with Graham, it's really concern for him. It's really a problem for him. And so that's why even with children, you cannot treat them exactly the same way because of the area of reward dependence. Next is persistence. This is a very interesting idea. Some people are very persistent, go for the broke, go for the goal. They fall down, they get up, and you keep going. On the other hand, you have the other extreme, which we've been talking about. This person maybe sees himself as a failure anyway. So consequently, if they fail, they just quit. You will find this in working with children with simple things like homework. Some need more encouragement than others. Some need more approval than others and help than others. And so you can't treat them the same way. Why aren't you like your brother? Why aren't you like your sister? Why? Because they're not. Okay, you understand this, again, this genetics of what we have. So these two areas are very important when you talk about how we are different.
The next big category, you have domains of temperament, now you have dimensions of character. And this particular category reflects what choices we make. Not how we make them, but what choices we make. The first one is cooperativeness. Some people play well with others. They're very good in think tanks. They're great on committees. They work with other people really well. They're not better than others. They're not worse than others. This is just who they are. Other people, not so much. That you give them their job, you give them their area, you give them their responsibility, and just kind of let them do their thing. Again, what's the phrase? Not right, not wrong, just different. We hope you're kind of getting sick of that by now. All right, the next is self-directedness. Now, this is not persistence. Persistence means the individual will keep trying, and that may or may not be a plus because it depends on what they're trying to do. Right? Or from a parent aspect, what are they doing? As far as self-directedness, this is an individual that has a pretty good idea of what they want to accomplish in life. And if they are persistent, then they will have plan A, B, and C. But all the time, persistence doesn't go with self-directedness. Now, like I said, if we're talking about parents, and certainly when we're working with adults, we are who we are at this point, but you're talking about parents, it's really interesting to kind of try to figure this out with your children and to kind of guide them in the right way. Sometimes it's like herding cats, I don't know, but nevertheless, just trying to mold and shape them. So persistence. Self-directedness. The final one is the one that causes people like us to stutter step a little bit, because you see the word spirituality. And keep in mind, Cloninger is a very religious person. He really is. But this is science now. And so he is not necessarily talking about a belief in God. If you look up self-transcendence online and really look, it has been a term that has been thrown around for probably almost 2 centuries in some form or another. And sometimes it is viewed very positively as an altruistic term, someone that really can forget self and look at the good of the whole and more or less negate their own preferences. But there is another whole school of thought and everything in between that says that this can borderline on psychotic behavior. Especially if you have an individual that thinks they're a little bit more intuitive than other people, a little bit wiser than other people. They have a better handle on what is going on globally than other people. But you couple that trait with an individual that is not reward dependent and is not cooperative, and you really end up with nitroglycerin in a wagon. Do you see? Because they think they're smarter anyway, and they don't care what anybody says, and they're certainly not going to negotiate differences or compromise with anybody, cooperate. And so that is Robert Cloninger in a nutshell. Okay.
Let's move on and talk about schemata and a paradigm. Schemata, we'll jump the gun. We'll get to that in just a minute. Let me do the fifth one here for you. Physical health. If you're having a physical health problem, you're going to have problems then in seeing the world the same way that other people see the world. For instance, if you're dealing with migraine headaches, you're dealing with backaches, you're dealing with anxiety, or what, if you're dealing with depression. Now, we mentioned depression here. We will deal with this somewhere down the line in our conference. Yeah. We'll talk about that in a very detailed way because it's very misunderstood. It actually comes from 4 different sources. And we will explain to you, and if this is a problem for you or somebody you know, then we're going to be able to help you in the area. So if you're dealing with a physical problem, you cannot expect yourself to see the world the same way as other people who do not have that particular problem. Now, let's move on to schemata and paradigms. Schemata is mental maps that guide thought and behavior. These are substructures on what's called a paradigm. Now listen carefully. The longer you have lived believing a certain thing should be a certain way, and the more you've invested in it, the harder it is to change even when outside information contradicts it. Now that's a mouthful. Listen again. The longer you have lived believing a certain thing should be a certain way, and the more you have invested in it, the harder it is to change even when outside information contradicts it. We talk about older people set in their ways. Why would we say that? Well, if they've lived 40, 50, 60, 70 years believing a certain way, or certain things should be a certain way, then it's got to be that way. Let's say Lynn has lived 74 years believing this color is
yellow.
Yellow. She thinks it's yellow.
It's yellow. It's a nice yellow.
Yellow. We've got a doctor's appointment tomorrow. All right, she believes that she's lived 74 years believing this color is yellow. Now, I can show her all the evidence that you want to pile up, and for her to change, she cannot change. Now, for her to change, you got 2 or 3 options that she's going to change. She either has to get, change her mind, which is very difficult, or get rid of the evidence. It creates what's called cognitive dissonance there. And so that's about all the things she can do. Man goes to the doctor said, what's your problem? The doctor said, I'm dead. He tells the doctor, I'm dead. He said, how long have you been dead? He said, several years. Doctor said, well, do dead men bleed? He said, no. And so he said, stick your finger out. Stuck his finger out, cut his finger, blood started coming out. Doctor said, what do you think about that? He said, what do you know? Dead men do bleed, don't they? So, in other words, you get all the evidence. It's fairly difficult to do. And so this is the basis of cultism today. A person goes into a Jim Jones, David Koresh type cult. What do? They sacrifice their friends, their finances, their freedoms, and everything else. And even when they get in there and see all the bad things happening, for them to say, I've been wrong about this thing is very, very difficult to do. Now, these mental maps that guide thought and behavior. Let's talk about that for just a moment. Again, we have hundreds and thousands of these. For example, if I said the phrase living room, you have a mental map of a living room. It's for some of you, it's where you maybe read the newspaper, you watch TV, you maybe have a meal in there, dog sleeps on the couch. In other words, it's the hub of the family. For some of you, that's not living room, is it? Living room is that room off to the side that nobody's allowed to go into except company now and then. You fluff it and puff it, you keep it so clean you can do open heart surgery on the floor. Now, again, it's not right or wrong, but it's just in other words the picture you have. If I mention vacation, you have a mental map of vacation. For some of you, might be going to Branson or maybe going down to Florida. You wouldn't want to go to North Carolina, I don't believe right now. But anyway, in other words, you have a mental map. Again, not right or wrong, but that's what happens. And so these words then create mental maps of guide thought and behavior. Now, what we've done tonight is we brought a couple friends with us tonight. We call them Albert and Betty. Now, they might not look like Lynn and Jerry, but before the evening's over, maybe you will understand this thing. Now, let me tell you about Albert and Betty. Albert and Betty took premarital counseling, which was a wise thing for them to do. And the last session with the counselor said, you all are going to have problems in communication. Well, they left that session and got in the car, and they said how inept that counselor is. We will never have any problems in communication because we talk all the time. They had then equated conversation with communication, and that's not necessarily the same thing. Now, Albert and Betty work outside the home, same number of hours. So they decided then that they would get up at 7 o'clock on Saturday morning and they would clean the house.
Together.
So what happens is Betty's then idea of clean house travels over time and place and activates Albert's clean house.
All right, it is 7 o'clock. And in her mind, when the alarm goes off, she thinks, time to get up and clean the house. So he shakes Albert into wakefulness, get up and clean the house. Same words, same language, travel over time and space. Surely it has the same meaning. Surely. Maybe, maybe not. Jerry, would you tell us what Albert thinks about when he thinks about clean house?
If there's a path you can get through. All the dirty dishes in the sink and nothing green growing in them. Waste paper cans are full but not overflowing. Bedclothes are thrown up on top of the bed, and all dirty clothes within 4 feet of the hamper. That is clean house.
That's not what Betty thinks about when she thinks about clean house. She's not right, she's not wrong, but she is different. When she thinks about clean house, and Brenda knows this about me, she wants it dusted, she wants it vacuumed, she wants the bathroom sterilized, kitchen floor scrubbed, trash cans empty would be nice, mirrors polished. In other words, she wants the house clean.
You come to my house sometime and stand still more than 15 seconds. Several options could take place. You could be dusted, you could be painted, you could be put in your place. I got up at 2 o'clock in the morning to get a drink of water and came back and found the bed made, folks.
I used to try to rebuttal, I don't anymore. Next week, we are going to have a royal argument.
Yeah, we're going to have a fight next week.
Up here.
And if Roman Reigns and John Cena are your heroes, hey, you come here next week and we can outdo them.
So you pretty
Slam
well,
dunk.
you have an idea about what we're going to be yelling about next week. Okay.
All right, clean house.
Now.
All right, now we've cleaned the house. It's 12 o'clock, and Albert's been reading all these books that couples need to spend time together. Now, so he says that, Betty, let's spend some time together. Now, he never said that before, and Betty's all excited. She said, well, what are we going to do? I said, it's noontime. And the Missouri Tigers are playing the Arkansas Razorbacks in football. You get in your chair, I get in my chair, and the game will begin. Now, it's very important that you not say anything during the game because I might miss some play. Now, at halftime, you can say anything you want to say, that's all right. And then the game, you go back in your chair, I get in my chair, and the game, of course, obviously, the Missouri Tigers will win probably 50 to nothing. And so she turns to Betty and says, have we spent a wonderful Saturday afternoon together?
Albert, have you and Betty said anything of substance
We
during
have
that
been
time?
within 6 feet of one another for 3 hours. That's togetherness.
That is not what Betty thinks about when she thinks about time together. Again, not right, not wrong, just different. But when she thinks about time together, she wants in his face. And I don't mean in a negative way, but she wants him to listen to her with his eyes.
Now, gentlemen, if
She
you
doesn't want him watching television, working on the computer, reading, writing. She wants his undivided attention.
Now, if your wife wants you to go shopping with her, gentlemen, it's probably she doesn't need any suggestions.
No.
You know, but you're going in and out of these stores. You're spending wonderful time together, as she defines time together. All right.
Moving right along.
Moving right along. Let's talk about the ego defenses. A child, when they're born in this world, does not know where they start and something or where they begin something else is. I mean, they just don't know that. Did you ever see a child with their hand focused on their hand. Why? Because they don't know that's my hand. Now, most adults don't do this because you figured it out by now. So, did you ever see a child, I can't even come close to this one, you get their foot and stick their foot in their mouth, bite their own foot, and begin to cry, and you look at your spouse, and you say, we have one that's not too bright. It has nothing to do with intelligence, class, nothing to do whatsoever. It just does not know that's my foot. Now, between the 12th and 24th month, the child begins to decide some things. I'm not the floor, I'm not the wall, I'm not you. As we call it, the terrible twos. And it's mine, I do it. Tough time in the life of the parent, okay? Good time in the life of the child. It's developing then what we call the I am or the ego. It begins between the 12th and 24th month, and then it continues on until they're 12 or 15 or 20 or 25. Sometimes it takes some longer to develop than others, but that's the way it is. Now, because this I am is the most frail part of the personality, so it comes into existence with what we call a whole arsenal of defenses.
Now, it is the most frail part of the personality. In other words, Jerry might say something very hurtful to you and then break your arm. I wouldn't be that strong. Okay, but let's say that would happen, all right? 10, 20, 30 years down the way, if you remember that incident, what are you going to remember, the broken arm or the words?
The words. So there's not an adult here that can't remember something that was said in your youth. You're dumb, you're stupid, what are you using for brains or whatever it might be. And here you are now a very responsible adult. So here again, that is an illustration of the frail part of the personality.
Now, Jerry said because of that, it comes into existence with a whole arsenal to defend it. Now, an arsenal, and that's a strange word, but we can't come up with any other word that is that's accurate in description as far as the ego defenses or defense mechanisms they used to be called. Why? Because an arsenal is always covered, it's hidden, correct? It's never just out in the open, and it serves one purpose only, and that is to destroy whatever someone feels is threatening, correct? That's its purpose. That's it. Now, we are back to anthropology at this point. We will dance around anthropology in several of our sessions simply because we cannot divorce ourselves from what we are, correct? Apex of creation, we are created to survive. Now, hardwired into us is survival. That is why food and sex are so easy to overindulge. And we'll talk about when we talk about addictions and all of that kind of stuff. Now, let's take it back. If we are hardwired to survive, if I'm out over here years and thousands and whatever years ago, and I come across a woolly mammoth, I do not have to have a committee meeting of all my body parts to figure out what to do. Right arm, what do you want to do? Left ear, how about you? Nose, you haven't said a word. No, hardwired into me is fight or flight, or I'd probably faint. Why? Because if I don't do that, I die. You see, if that were not part of us, then the species would not survive, correct? The human being thrives on stability, it thrives on safety. Well, that's physical, yes, but ladies and gentlemen, the mind echoes that same principle.
Okay.
If something comes into my life that an experience or an emotion that I don't know how to handle and I feel threatened by it, I don't feel safe, the ego defenses give me an out. In other words, I can run away from it. I don't have to admit it. Now, for the next few moments, we're going to go through some ego defenses. They can be helpful or they can be destructive.
Okay, they can be helpful. In other words, they can be helpful in the sense that they allow you time to adjust to events or situations. For instance, let's say you lose a loved one suddenly, a car wreck, heart attack. For you then, when you visit that person, for them to accept the new normal is just too difficult. So they are, they just can't accept that. But they can be destructive in the sense that they keep us from, if they keep us from acknowledging a sin or interfere with our relationships. So these defense mechanisms that we're going to talk about can either be good or they can be bad. Now, we're going to go through just a few of them very briefly, and it's going to be very important as we go through these things. If you have one up on the screen that looks like the person next to you has done, you're not allowed to punch them and say, that's you right there, okay? We're not going to allow that at all. That's not going to work. As far as the next few minutes is concerned, as far as I'm concerned, it's all about me. As far as Lynn's concerned, it's all about her. So then these have to be applied to you. Maybe some other time you can talk about them. But let's go through the major ones. The first one is denial. Denial is refusal to admit there's a problem or accept responsibility for one's attitude or actions. If you're familiar with a 12-step program, you know what the first step is. You've got to admit, I'm an alcoholic, I'm a drug addict, I'm a gambler, or whatever you might be. So, you see, denial wants to come in there and wants to protect the I am or the ego. Lynn comes to me and says, there's a problem in the marriage. I say, yeah, it's all over to you. Well, it might be, might not be, I don't know. But denial is then just to keep yourself basically from hurting.
And also her job is to make sure we don't admit we have any of the others.
Yeah.
The next is withdrawal. Now keep in mind, these operate right below conscious level. We don't know they're there unless we try to find them, and then they're very obvious. But under ordinary circumstances, we don't, but they're a huge block to good communication. The next is withdrawal. You'll see this.
We're going to work a little bit.
We'll do what?
Okay. We're going to deal with...
What?
Okay, you with withdrawal?
Yeah.
Okay.
Would you like me not to?
No.
Would you like me to choose another?
No, that would be fine. Have
All
you
right.
finished with withdrawal?
Okay.
We're having a communication problem right now.
All right. Okay. I think maybe it's a focus problem.
Yeah,
I'm not
focus
sure.
problem.
Yeah. All right. Withdrawal. You see the psychobabble definition: removing oneself mentally or physically from whatever is perceived as threatening. My definition: it's too hot in here, so I'm leaving the building.
You know, if you've ever been
wait a minute. In other words, you are getting too close to me, emotionally, mentally. I don't want to deal with it, and so I am out of here.
Have you ever been talking to somebody and said, well, if you don't shut your mouth, I'm going to my mother? In other words, I'm out of here. I can't handle this. This is the basis for your drug and alcohol problems today. A person cannot handle the world in which they found themselves, so they withdraw into a world of drugs or alcohol in order to do this. Now, there is a legitimate use of withdrawal. Let's say that Lynn comes to me and says there's a problem in the marriage, and maybe it's late at night, maybe I'm tired, maybe I'm emotionally distracted, and I'll say, Lynn, I said, there sure is, but I can't discuss it now. It is my job, gentlemen, to establish a time within the next 24 hours.
Would you repeat that?
I have to establish a time within the next 24 hours of when we're going to deal with this. Okay, let's talk about this at 7 o'clock tomorrow night here in
Not
the
at some other time.
No, some other time doesn't qualify. You have to specify the date, then and time, and that's where you're going to have to do it. Now, when people get to know us a little bit, sometimes they ask us, did the two of you ever argue?
You know us well, and if you know, yeah, you do. You know our personalities. You know the answer to that. Don't you think we argue?
Well, I wouldn't call it that.
All right, what do you want to call it?
I would call it moments of intense fellowship. Let's move on to displacement.
And we have opportunities just like you. The next is displacement. And this occurs when an individual perceives a less threatening person or object as the source of one's problems or difficulties. My definition of that is basically I choose someone in my life that is lower on the hierarchy than I am. That really means someone that has to put up with me, that can't get away from me. Ironically, these are usually the people I say I love the most. The ones I live with, maybe the people that I'm close to at work or whatever it would be. Someone that has to put up with me, that can't get away from me, catches my heat. Almost always displacement involves vented anger.
A man's been working on a project at work for a long time. His boss calls him in, says, well, let me see it. So he sees it. The boss says, this is unacceptable. Tear it up and start all over again. I mean, these guys got angry, but he displaces the anger on the boss. He's liable to get fired. So on the way home, he goes in the house, and there's his wife cooking green beans rather than peas. And he said, you ought to know I don't like green beans. And so he just places the anger on her, and she doesn't know what's happened at the office. But the 16-year-old teenager has the radio on entirely too loud. So she stomps on it, don't turn that thing down, I want to throw it out in the backyard. It's been the same volume for the last 6 months. 16-year-old teenager can't figure out what tree mom's falling out of, but the 5-year-old brother happened to walk in through the room. You don't walk through the room like that, scared little 5-year-old. He runs then and goes to his room and closes the door, looks around, picks up his teddy bear and says, I told you, if you don't get that smirk off your face, I'm going to smash your nose. It's the basis of a lot of your spousal and child abuse today. And next week, we're going to deal with anger.
Now keep in mind, anger is not venting. Venting is one face of anger. But we're going to actually dissect that entire concept next week. Better yet, show you how to handle it and how to resolve conflict. Next, projection. This occurs when an individual attributes unacceptable attitudes or actions that he or she might be experiencing to other people. My definition, someone else has my problems. Someone else has my problems. Let's review. By the time we're 19, 20, 21, we define who we are, what we'll do, correct? Hopefully our moral value our moral value, what am I trying to say? Whatever it is, our moral and value.
Don't ask me.
You put a word in there. Okay, whatever you want. Oh, and I define myself morally with my values, okay? And that's who I am. That's how I've identified. If I act in a way that betrays who I think I am, it makes me feel unsafe, correct? I mean, I don't know what's going on. It's just incongruent. I don't feel good. I don't know how else to say it. And so when the big gun of projection handles it, it just says, everyone else get out of the way. I've got this one. You don't have that problem. Other people have that problem. It is much, much easier for me to say, Jerry, you're being so selfish, than it is for me to do what? Lynn, look at yourself. Look how selfish you're being.
It's always easy for me to say, Lynn, you're hard to get along with, and then admit that I'm hard to get along with. Have you ever been talking to another individual about the third person here, and all of a sudden it dawned on you that that person is projecting on that person their feelings? A man goes to the doctor, and the doctor said, what's your problem? He said, I believe my wife has a hearing problem, and she won't get tested. What should I do? He said, that's easy. Go home and say some things when she's not looking at you and find out what kind of reaction. He said, well, okay, that makes sense. So he goes home and comes in the back door, and there she is, back turned to him at the stove cooking supper. So she doesn't hear him come in, so he says, what's for supper? She doesn't say anything. He moves a little bit closer and says, I said, what's for supper? She still didn't say anything. He gets right behind her head and says, I said, what's for supper? She turns around about as mad as she can be. She said, I'm telling you for the third time, chicken.
Aren't these fun? I mean, it really is amazing. Okay, the next one, and the next to last, is regression. It occurs when an individual reverts back to a time that was characteristic of a time that was more secure and satisfying. That is just a really weird way to say we act like children. That we don't know how to resolve conflict and communication issues like adults. And so what happens is we knee-jerk and we go back and we act like we acted when we were children, when we felt threatened, when we didn't feel safe. Ladies and gentlemen, when you have adult people yelling at each other like we are going to do royally next week, when you have people hitting each other, we're not going to do that. Fists through walls, things thrown, we're not going to do that. Even road rage sometimes, what you really have are 4-year-olds in adult bodies. And that is hard for all of us to hear, but that's exactly what happens. We cannot resolve conflict without feeling threatened. And so we go back and act like children before we learned, hopefully, better. The final is the king of all. We all use this one, rationalization. It occurs when an individual justifies true motivations for one's thoughts, actions, and feelings through reassuring or self-serving but incorrect explanations. Actually, the source of rationalization and projection are the same, they just play out differently. Review. By the time we're 19, 20, 21, we define who we are, what we'll do. And if we behave in a way that contradicts who we think we are, it makes us feel unsafe. When I project, I say, I don't have this problem, you have it. When I rationalize, I don't give the problem to you, I just conveniently change the rules. Well, I had to speed because, you see, if I didn't speed, I would have been late to work, then I would have lost my job, and I couldn't have fed my kids, and I couldn't have paid my mortgage. So I had to speed. The problem is I'm always late, so I'm always speeding.
All right, back in 1979, I was chairman of the Bible department of Harding University, traveling all over the country, doing lectures and meetings and so on. I went down to Lufkin, Texas, and did a presentation then, jumped in my car and drove north into Dallas. Turned then east and going toward Texarkana, trying to get back to Searcy that Sunday night. Now, in 1979, what happened, there was an energy crunch, and so the government says 55 miles an hour was only going to be the maximum speed limit on all the major highways. Now, I'd put an old CB in the car because I had this old car, and I thought, well, if it breaks down, I can call somebody to help me. So I'm going along there, and I turned that thing on. I turned it on, and I found, because what I couldn't understand, the truckers were going right past me like I was sitting still. I thought, how can they be doing 70 and 75 when the speed limit is 55? So I turned that thing on and began to listen to the truckers talk to one another. And what they were doing, they were helping one another. In other words, when they saw the highway patrolman, they would say it's a certain mile marker, so they'd slow down, not get a ticket, and speed up. I thought, what a nice thing to do. I thought, well, maybe they might be interested in helping me. So I got on that microphone and said, breaker, breaker 19, you got the Arkansas Deer Slayer eastbound the super slab of the 3-0 marker at the 15 marker looking for a front door. Come back. Pretty soon I had a voice coming, we got Ratchet Jaws up here, Arkansas, it's clean and green, put the pedal to the metal and come on. I said, I'm coming. 70 miles an hour and I'm doing fine. I thought, well, I better get me a back door. Breaker, breaker 19, you got the Arkansas Deer Slayer. I need a back door. And finally I heard a voice come back, got Tumbleweed back here, Arkansas Deer Slayer. We be your back door, Ratchet Jaws be your front door, and we are gone. I said, well, I'm doing 70 miles an hour. Man, I'm going to get home sooner, get to bed and all this is great and everything else. And so I'm doing fine. Well, about midnight, sometimes truckers got a little lonely, and so I heard in the call, breaker, breaker 19, Arkansas Deer Slayer, you got your ears on? I said, 10-bore, kicker back. He said, Arkansas Deer Slayer, you head Bitter Rock City? I said, negatory. That's how you talk to Ratchet Jaws. Negatory. We headed to that Searcy town north of that Rock City, don't you know, bring her back? He said, Arkansas Deer Slayer, what be your occupation in that Searcy town? Arkansas Deer Slayer, you got your ears on? No, did I hear him? Yeah, I heard him. But something kept me from saying, you got the chairman of the Bible department of Harding University. We're doing 70 miles an hour down this interstate to get home and teach our class at 8 o'clock on the 10 Commandments. I slowed it down to the double nickel, where I should have been. Tumbleweed blew my doors. And I went home at 55 miles an hour. What had I done? I had rationalized behavior. We watch people rationalize lying, cheating, stealing, dishonesty through rationalization. Quickly, how do you defend against the offenses? Number one, you got to admit that you've had them. You've had them since you're 2, you have them till you're 102. Go ahead and admit that. Number 2, identify them. When moments of intense fellowship, did you deny? Did you regress? Did you project? What did you do? Finally, then, learn to work around them. Our job next week is going to be talk about anger, not anger management, but how to cut the cancer out. Everybody's got anger, folks. And here again, we're going to give you a positive way in order to deal with that. We're going to deal with abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse. We'll deal with that. We're going to deal with forgiveness. And we're going to give you then a model whereby you can deal with the differences and so on. And it'll be a very, very productive deal. You've sat here tonight. You've been a very, very good audience, and you've taken good. Be sure to bring your notes back, especially that additional resource list that's in there, because we'll be using that from time to time. If you, for some reason, didn't get one, we'll have one ready for you. Some of you are visiting with us. We thank you very much for
We do.
coming.
Thank you.
And thanks to Child Care people. Good night
Yeah.
and God bless.
Thank you, and be safe.